I was halfway through passing the bread when my father set his knife down with the kind of care that meant trouble. "Nora," he said, not looking at the roast he'd been pretending to carve, "where's the $500,000? The room went quiet enough to hear the air vent hum. My mother's wine glass paused just shy of her lips. Across from me, my sister Ava's fork hung in midair like a small white flag. I opened my mouth, closed it, and then heard the doorbell ring, a bright domestic sound that felt obscene against the cold that swept through me. 3 hours earlier, I had told myself to stop catastrophizing. I'd wrapped a bottle of my father's favorite single malt in navy paper and driven over early, repeating the same practical mantra I use for third graders and adults alike. When you don't know what's going on, observe. Keep your eyes open. Take notes. Observation is how I survive. My classroom at Maple Ridge Elementary is a narrow rectangle that we've turned into a small cosmos. A timeline of migration arcs over the whiteboard. A paper city of recycled shoebox buildings grows each month as we talk about community and care. 21 8-year-olds say my name 100 times a day with the faith that I can make the world legible. I know which student will need a fidget when we start fractions, which one will pretend a stomachache when we switch to reading aloud. I am good at this. It's not the sort of success my family counts, but it's real. The Bennetts count other things. My father, Richard Bennett, built Bennett Strategic Advisors from a desk wedged between a crib and a laundry basket in a rented duplex. He likes to tell that origin story over scotch, lingering on the part where he decided risk was another way to spell opportunity. The firm outgrew the duplex, then the shared space over a dentist's office, then the glass box of a building whose lobby smells like cedar and money. His business card, heavy, toothy, expensive, has an embossed compass on it. Direction, he'll say, tapping the compass as if it's a talisman. That's what people pay me for. Ava speaks that language. 4 years older, she occupies a corner office at Harbor First Bank and makes quarterly goals sound like thrilling adventures. She knows the names of venture-backed apps and which private school headmasters accept which sort of donation. She wears cream blouses that never wrinkle and shoes that look modest until you Google the brand. With Ava, my father's conversations take flight rates, swaps, networks, runway. With me, they tend to land in the cul-de-sac of "have you thought about a master's in something?" Practical. It isn't that they don't love me. It's that they love a particular story about us, and my chapter has never been their favorite. When I remember the day the story first cracked, I don't begin at the table. I rewind to lunch with Ava the week before at Sable and Thyme, a place with ceramic plates the size of satellites and edible flowers on everything. She chose it because we should treat ourselves, and I didn't argue because I dislike being the kind of person who says no to flowers you can eat. "How's the bank?" I asked when the server set down our drinks. Ava gave me a distracted smile and then reached for her phone the second it buzzed. Her face emptied in the way faces do when the body forgets to wear its mask. "1 sec," she murmured, already sliding away from the table. She was gone long enough for the ice in my water to melt and realign. When she came back, her lipstick had a hairline fracture in it. Just a client who thinks the end of the quarter is the apocalypse. What kind of apocalypse? I tried to make it a joke. She didn't laugh. Later that afternoon, I took a folder of seating charts and permission slips to my parents' house because my mother had offered to help cut and collate. She's a meticulous woman who enjoys tasks with edges and piles. My father's home office door was cracked, and as I passed it, I saw Ava's back. The profile of her neat bun, the tension vibrating through her shoulders as she stood too close to my father's desk. "He asked for the old tax files," she said when she noticed me. Her voice light, her hands not quite steady. "I couldn't find them in the safe. In our family, there are certain details you don't have to say aloud. One of them is that important documents do not live in the desk drawers. They live behind the landscape painting of blue hills inside a fireproof box. Another is that Ava never admits she can't find anything. That night, my father called and asked, "Did your mother mention anything odd in our bank statements?" "No," I said, because it was true, and also because you don't survive in this family by offering guesses. "Should she have?" "It's nothing you need to worry about," he replied, which is what he says when something is precisely worth worrying about. An hour later, my mother texted me a string of ellipses, and then, "Your father is on the phone in the office again. He seems not himself." She is not an alarmist, my mother. If Marian uses an ellipsis, it is because she cannot bear to end the sentence with a period. I did my own small version of due diligence. I searched for news about the firm and found nothing with headlines, but on a regional finance forum where usernames wear suits, there was a thread about liquidity pressure at several mid-sized consultancies. BSA was named in a comment that felt both knowing and cruel. The next day at the co-op, I ran into Alan Greer, my father's longtime partner, a man who usually greets me with a booming, "Professor Nora." Today he said, "Hello, Nora," as if he were reading the name off a form. When I asked how he was, he said, managing a non-answer softened with a non-smile. Then in the family group chat we mostly used to schedule holiday menus. Ava wrote, "Might be best to postpone Sunday dinner. Work is wild." My father, who treats our monthly dinners as a secular sacrament, responded in seconds. "Dinner stands. We all show up. By Sunday afternoon, I had turned my anxious energy into tasks." I sliced grapes for a salad, ironed a cloth napkin I planned to ignore in favor of a paper one, wrapped the bottle of scotch with an unnecessarily precise ribbon. On the drive over, a bruise-colored wall of storm clouds stacked over the freeway. "It is going to rain," the weather app had warned in cheerful blue, and I found the certainty oddly comforting. I let myself into the house with the code we all know and pretend to forget between uses. "Hi, it's me," I called, and the house answered with the quiet of a person holding their breath. It smelled like lemon cleaner and rosemary. The table in the dining room was already set with the wedding china and the silver that lives in velvet coffins. I put the gift on the entryway console and followed the faint drone of voices to the corridor that leads to my father's office. The door was ajar, not an accident, but not an invitation, and I stopped just at the slice of light. "You need to be straight with me," my father was saying, in the tone he uses with clients who have tried and failed to keep their panic from showing. His voice was even, but it carried an edge I recognized from childhood when he would ask kindly at first, and then less so, who had broken the lamp. Ava's reply was a whisper I couldn't catch. "A mistake doesn't move $500,000, he said louder now. "A misclick doesn't open an account. $500,000. The number dropped into my chest like a stone. I'm not a numbers person the way my father is, but even I know how heavy 6 zeros are. "I told you I'm handling it," Ava said, and there was a thread of pleading in her voice that I had rarely heard. "Ava pleads with no one. Handling is what you say when you are not," he answered. "Tomorrow we will sit down at this table, all of us, and you will bring everything. Documents, names, times." I took a step back, and the floorboard complained, the conversation inside cut off. I continued to retreat soft-footed back toward the kitchen where the rosemary had overperformed, and the oven ticked as it cooled. This is where part 1 ends for me. Not with the accusation I didn't yet understand, but with the knowledge that something was wrong in a way that could not be plated and passed with the roast chicken. I chopped herbs I couldn't taste, laid out salt cellars no one needed, and waited for the rest of the family to arrive. It was going to rain. The kind that begins as a warning. One cold drop on the back of your hand before the sky admits what it has been holding. Rain arrived before the rest of the family did first, as a pinprick on the window, then as a hush running across the glass like someone smoothing out a sheet. I set the salad on the sideboard, straightened a napkin that didn't need straightening, and told myself that quiet was not the same thing as peace. The house had that polished calm my mother cultivates before company candles at the far end of the table, a rosemary chicken glistening under foil, the good china arrayed like a ceremony. It all looked steady. It felt like standing on a dock that won't stop moving. Ava came in first 10 minutes early and already windblown. She shook her umbrella in the entry and kissed my cheek like a stranger greeting a cousin at a wedding. Her perfume, something crisp and expensive, met the lemon cleaner halfway. "Traffic," she said, though we both knew she lives 5 minutes away. Her blouse was immaculate, her lipstick uncracked, but there was a pulse at her throat that hadn't been there a week ago at Sable and Time. My parents followed, as if they had rehearsed the order, my mother with a serving spoon in one hand and her phone in the other. My father empty-handed expression, neutral in the way of men who are choosing each word before it exists. We convened around the table because that is what Bennetts do. It was our monthly right no matter what. "Tell me about your class." "Nora," my mother said brightly as she poured water, then wine. "You were doing what is it? Ecosystems, closed biomes," I said. They're learning that you can balance a whole world in a plastic bottle if you pay attention. I heard myself and wished I had picked a different metaphor. They should be learning about balancing checkbooks. My father said almost on autopilot, but his voice lacked its usual teasing edge. He cut into the chicken, then into arranging and rearranging the knife on his plate without taking a bite. "Harbor First is a circus this quarter," Ava volunteered, and the words came out tilted, as though she had planned a different conversation and changed scripts at the last minute. "Regulatory nonsense. Everyone's jumpy." "Jumpy," my father repeated softly, like he was trying the weight of the word. His gaze didn't lift from his plate. The fork in Ava's hand made a delicate, nervous tattoo against the china. We tried other topics. My mother's new herb garden, a book club selection none of us would read, but they slid off the surface of the evening like rain off the window. The silence that followed had shape and temperature. I recognized it the way you recognize weather. The pressure shifted and my ears popped. My father set down his knife with the same carefulness that had made me cold earlier in the week in his office doorway. He folded his napkin, smoothing the crease with his thumb. Then he looked at me. "Nora," he said, in a voice that was gentle in tone and hard in purpose. "Where is the $500,000? The world narrowed to the small silver salt cellar in front of me. "I don't what?" "The $500,000 that left our business account 3 weeks ago," he said, moving with deliberate economy. He reached for a folder on the sideboard, the kind with brass corner protectors, and slid it onto the table like a dealer sliding a hand of cards. "It went to an account at South Shore Bank opened in your name. The wire went out in 4 tranches over 48 hours, then to Luxembourg, then to the Caymans. Explain it to me." "Dad, no," I said, and my voice came out thinner than I meant. "I never opened an account at South Shore. I haven't even been inside a South Shore." "What are you talking about?" He flipped the folder open and turned it so it faced me. Photocopies stared up a signature that could have been mine if you didn't know my hand as well as I do. A driver's license scan, a VIP onboarding form with my phone number, and an email address 1 letter off from my real one. A bank camera still grainy but recognizable enough to make my stomach tilt. A woman with my coloring, my haircut, a coat I might have chosen on a different day. The bank manager provided stills, my father said, voice tightening. "And timestamps. I asked for full footage. He sent a clipped version because of course he did, but I know what I'm looking at." "I don't," I said, "because it isn't me." Across the table, Ava's fork froze mid-air. My mother looked between the pages, and my face so quickly she couldn't keep her glasses straight. "Richard," she said, and I could hear all the years of practicing composure crowd into my name. "Let's not—" The doorbell rang. The sound was domestic, almost cheerful, and it made everything that wasn't cheerful or domestic clang in my chest. My father checked his watch. "That will be them," he said, and the flatness in them had its own weather system. He stood, went to the foyer, and returned with 2 people who rearranged the oxygen in the room. Detective Hannah Ruiz, the taller woman said, showing a badge. She had short hair and the kind of attention that makes you stand up straighter. "This is Officer Malik Chen, Mr. Bennett. Thank you for your call." "Ms. Bennett, Nora, I'm here with a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of felony fraud and theft. We can talk through it calmly." The shock was so clean it felt like clarity. "There's been a mistake," I said, "because that is what you say when your life has just misfiled itself under the wrong name." "I didn't open any account. I didn't move any money. The evidence Mr. Bennett provided is substantial." Detective Ruiz said not unkindly, "We'll want to hear your side, and you have the right to counsel." "Stop!" My mother said the word an arrow. She stood so quickly her chair tapped the wall. "Before you take my daughter anywhere, I need you to look at something." She reached into her tote, the soft, roomy kind she carries like a cape, and pulled out a thin manila envelope, its flap already creased from being opened and closed. "I hired a licensed investigator 3 days ago," she said, meeting my father's eyes for the first time all night without flinching. Because this did not make sense. My father's mouth opened, then closed, and for once he had nothing to fill the air. Detective Ruiz took the envelope and glanced at the first page, then the next. Her eyebrows moved just slightly. She stepped toward the light and held a glossy print to it. "You didn't get the full South Shore footage," she said to my father without looking away from the photo. "Ms. Bennett did." She nodded at my mother. And Ms. Bennett's investigator did frame-by-frame multiple angles. She turned the photo so we could all see. The image from the bank wasn't a single still, but a sequence stitched from different cameras' entrance lobby desk. The woman in the photos had my outline but not my gait. Her mouth pulled differently when she spoke. Her left hand favored a ring finger I've never worn anything on. Ava Bennett, Detective Ruiz said not a question. Then to my sister, would you like to tell us why you entered South Shore Bank wearing a wig that approximates your sister's hair, carrying identification bearing her name? The room went so quiet I could hear the rain pocking the patio. Ava's eyes went wide, and then empty the way a window goes dark when the power cuts out. This is absurd, she said, and even her denial sounded well-educated. I'm a vice president at Harbor First. Why would I open an account at South Shore? Detective Ruiz slid another document across the table. Because you were deeply overextended at Harbor First and had maxed out 3 lines of credit elsewhere, she said evenly. Because Riverlight Casino has you on record electronically and personally as a regular who owes north of $300,000. Because you took 2 short-term personal loans at punitive rates and the clock ran out. Because a man named Colin Ward approached you with a way to make it go away. My father made a small, raw sound I had never heard from him. He picked up the glossy print as if it might burn through his hand. Ava, he said, and in his voice was the kind of grief that has not decided whether it will become anger or silence. Tell me, this is a misunderstanding. It was supposed to be temporary, Ava said, and the mask gave way so fast it was like watching a building implode. She pressed her fingers to her eyes the way children do when they don't want to be seen. I was going to fix it before anyone noticed. Colin said he said it would be a bridge, that the money would vanish on paper for a while and come back through fees and offsets. He had people. You used my name, I said. The sentence sat in my mouth heavy and obvious. Ava flinched. It wasn't. She swallowed. It wasn't my idea to use yours. He said we needed a failsafe, someone close enough to Dad that if questions were asked, he'd circle the wagons. I told him you were a teacher, that you have nothing to do with the business. He said that was the point, that no one would believe you did it. He said it would never come to this. Detective Ruiz's posture didn't change, but something in the air did. Ms. Bennett, she said to Ava now. Voice crisp with professional fatigue and a thread of compassion. I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. Officer Chen will read you your rights. For a second, my mother reached instinctively toward Ava's wrist, then stopped herself. Fingers hovering in the space where a touch used to live. Officer Chen spoke in an even cadence I could have diagrammed on a whiteboard. The words ricocheted around the dining room and landed everywhere on the starched tablecloth, on the silver we used twice a year, on the gift I had wrapped so carefully and left in the entry as if a well-chosen bottle could ward off what was already inside the house. We'll need statements from everyone, Detective Ruiz said when it was quiet again. She addressed my father without deference or apology. Mr. Bennett, we'll coordinate with the Financial Crimes Unit to try to freeze what can be frozen. Offshore makes it trickier. The name your daughter gave us, Colin Ward, we know it. He's a facilitator. Not always charged, often involved. If he's moving funds, he'll be careful. If he knows we're looking, he'll be faster. How much can you recover? My father asked. He sounded older in that one question than he had all year. It depends on how many doors we can close before he walks through them, she said. It also depends on whether Ms. Ava Bennett cooperates fully. I recommend counsel. For all of you. Ava turned to me as Officer Chen guided her toward the foyer. For the first time that night, she looked like my sister instead of a composite of the worst possibilities. Nora, she said, and my name cracked in her mouth. The rest of the sentence crumbled. I didn't trust my voice to hold anything that wouldn't shatter, so I nodded once. It was both too little, and the only thing I had. They took her out into the rain. The red blue of the cruiser pulsed against the wet street, lit the hydrangeas an ugly operatic color. The door closed with the soft finality of a book snapping shut. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked at a storm none of us could do anything about. We did not sit back down. We stood in the dining room like the aftermaths of ourselves, and the food cooled. My mother put a hand on the back of a chair, and then changed her mind and put it at her throat. My father stayed where he was, the folder still open, the photos making the room look like someone else's house. I need to be very clear, Detective Ruiz said, turning to me before she left. You are not under arrest. Tonight is not about you, but your name is in the paperwork and your image is in the files. People will talk before they know. If you receive any communication texts, calls from anyone claiming to be connected to Mr. Ward, you call me immediately. Do not engage. We'll be in touch tomorrow. After the door shut and the rain reclaimed the soundscape, my mother found her voice again. Inez Calder, she said to my father as if resuming a conversation he had not joined. That's the investigator's name. She didn't just pull footage, she pulled records. There are patterns. If we cooperate, there's a chance. My father nodded without looking up. We will cooperate, he said, and we landed somewhere between command and confession. Then he finally met my eyes. He stopped, reorganized the word, and tried again. We will fix what can be fixed. I picked up the unopened bottle from the entry table, its ribbon still crisp. I had bought it thinking the right offering could keep us on one of the safer timelines. It felt absurd now, and also like the only honest thing left, something you can hold something with a predictable weight. Outside, the storm settled into itself. Down the block, a porch light came on, then another, a constellation gathering itself for an emergency no one had named aloud. I thought of my students' little sealed ecosystems on the windowsill at school, the way condensation gathered, the way a single brown leaf could throw off the balance until you lifted the lid and nudged things back where they belonged. By morning, the storm had wrung itself out, but the city felt rinsed and uneasy like a room after an argument. Detective Ruiz called at 8 sharp and asked me to come down to the precinct to finalize my statement. I took a cab because I didn't trust my hands on a steering wheel. The driver had the radio tuned to news, and I caught my last name before I could look away. Local financier's daughter arrested in alleged embezzlement scheme. The anchor's careful voice made our dining room sound like a set someone had overlit. At the station, I answered questions that required precision inside a life that now felt imprecise. Where had I been on the dates stamped on those screenshots? Teaching fractions, running morning meeting, grading spelling tests with a pen that smells faintly like cherries because the kids like it when I pretend their essays are dessert. Who could verify 21 third graders, a principal, a custodian, who gives me extra paper when the district forgets we exist? I listed adults instead. When it was over, Ruiz walked me to the door. 2 things, she said. First, your mother's investigator. Called her, she's thorough. We're looping her footage into the case file. Second, keep your phone on. If anyone contacts you, text or call me first. And Nora. She waited until I met her eyes. None of this is your fault. Fault is a strange instrument. Some of us learn to play it young. By noon, a photographer with a long lens had snapped me leaving the station. By 2, a mom from my class messaged to ask too brightly if I was doing okay with all the media stuff. By 3, the principal, Ms. Larkin, asked if I could stop by her office before dismissal. We're behind you, she said at once, hands folded. The way you fold paper, cranes you hope become birds, and the district is very clear that you've been cleared. But until the noise fades, I'd like you to shift into a curriculum role for a bit. Pulling materials, mapping scope and sequence, maybe piloting a unit. She was careful not to say out of sight. She didn't have to. I understand, I said, because I did. Then impulsively, words I hadn't planned arrived already formed. I can build a unit on money sense for kids' needs versus wants saving. Where dollars come from, what choices cost, age appropriate, rooted in community and fairness. Ms. Larkin blinked and then smiled like someone feeling a rope go taut in her hands. Draft me an outline, she said. We'll roll it into social studies. The headlines acted like floodwater, quick, cold, indiscriminate. Banker's sister, teacher's sister. The internet prefers binaries. Nuance is bad for rage. A neighbor who always borrowed sugar avoided my eyes in the elevator. My colleague Maya, who teaches next door, brought over soup in silence, which is the best kind of care. People will perform being informed, she said, finally breaking a cracker in half. Let them tire themselves out. I didn't visit Ava the first 3 days because I didn't know what my face would do, and because grief has its own choreography. On the 4th day, a letter came addressed in Ava's neat Rotary Club penmanship. The envelope was thin enough to make me think the apology would be thin too. It wasn't. Nora. It began, and the ink blotted once near my name, as if the letter had tried to cry. I know there aren't words for what I did, but words are what I have. I took the first loan after a bad quarter, and 3 small losses at the casino I convinced myself were strategic. Everyone I'm around talks about risk, like it's a vitamin, something that makes you stronger in the right dose. I didn't notice when I started swallowing it like candy. Colin Ward found me when I was dizzy. He said he could rearrange the furniture so it looked like more room. He told me there was a pressure release valve for everything if you knew where to push. She detailed it with the cool rigor she usually reserved for briefing docs, the private loans with teeth, the shell companies that sounded like coastal towns, the solution that required a name that wasn't hers. I argued about using you, she wrote. I argued for 12 minutes, and then 10, and then 5, until arguing became asking for better lighting in a windowless room. I told myself it wouldn't matter because Dad would never let you get hurt. I know what that sentence sounds like. It is worse than that. Near the end, the handwriting tightened. Listen to me now. Ward keeps everything contacts, fail-safes, leverage on a phone he treats like a passport. He calls it insurance. He likes loud places and cold brew. He prefers to meet at a coffee shop called Ember and Vine on Mercer because the music makes recordings messy. He uses an encrypted messenger with disappearing chats, but he brags. He will blame you for being the loose thread. Be careful. The letter left a paper ache in my hands. That night, a text arrived from an unknown number. Elegant mechanisms take time to build and seconds to ruin. People who ruin them don't keep their hands. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then nothing. I forwarded the number to Detective Ruiz and slept at my parents' house because the photos in my hallway felt like witnesses. Marion made tea, the way she makes hospital corners clipped and competent. Richard moved like a man learning the weight of his own name again. I should have seen it, he said to no one studying the grain of the dining table, as if it could tell the truth better than we had. My mother, who has spent a lifetime speaking softly, did not soften this. You didn't want to see it, she said. That's different. The next morning, I sat with Ruiz and a woman from the cyber team named Priya Menon, who had the quiet confidence of someone who can watch a door without leaning on it. We laid out Ava's letter, the threatening text the habits described. He picks Ember and Vine because it's noisy, Menon said, tapping a pen. Good for him, inconvenient for us. But noise can be filtered. What we need is leverage. Something that makes him reach. What if he believes I have something he wants, I said. The words felt dangerous coming out and perfectly at home in the room. A key he lost, a copy of a copy, access to a backup he thought was bulletproof. Ruiz shook her head on reflex. I'm not putting you in a room with him. I'm not asking for the room, I said, just for the knock on its door. Over the next 10 days under supervision, that would have made my father proud. We built a version of me that Ward might recognize as useful. I browsed where he would expect me to browse forums, where compliance officers tell ghost stories, subreddits, where everyone is an expert until they're not. I asked a question in a niche channel under a new handle Bottle Rocket 87 about off-site token caches and panicked rollbacks. Priya set up Honey accounts that looked convincingly sloppy, half-redacted spreadsheets in a cloud folder labeled with a misspelled client name, chat logs suggesting I'd gotten copies of something I shouldn't have. We let those shadows be seen by the right eyes. The waiting was its own occupation. I drafted the outline for Money Sense with a fierceness that surprised me. Lessons about jars labeled spend, save, you share, about how a budget is a story you tell your future self. I walked with my mother in the evenings and learned the names of her herbs. My father called lawyers and auditors and wants me to ask what a good lesson on opportunity cost would look like for 8-year-olds. I slept badly and well, alternating like a heartbeat. On the 11th day, the knock came as a text from a different unlisted number. Mr. Ward proposes an exchange. You have items of interest. He has influence where it counts. Tomorrow, Tenieu. 30 Ember and Vine. Come alone. Leave your conscience in a locker. A link followed, expiring after a single tap. Priya captured it anyway. We'll never have you alone, Ruiz said, and set about proving it. They wired my tote, wired my phone, wired the idea that I could be a person alone in a crowded room. Officers I didn't know became customers I didn't notice. A delivery driver stayed too long with a stack of milk crates. Priya's team set up a legal intercept on any device that reached for that expiring link again. I arrived at Ember and Vine on time and asked for a small coffee for my hands. The shop was all concrete and filament bulbs, a low hum of laptops and playlists. A man in his 40s in a slate blazer lifted his cup in a gesture so small it could have been a tick. "Ms. Bennett," he said when I sat. "I'm Mark." Names are unimportant. His smile practiced modesty. "Let's start with assurances. We're not villains. We solve urgent problems. You sell umbrellas in a rainstorm," I said, because I had rehearsed not to be clever and then forgot. "What do you want to know? Whether the copies you claim are copies," he said, amused. "Whether your sister told you where the boxes are buried. Whether you appreciate the value of silence. And whether you're smart enough to realize that formal justice is a rake you step on, not a path." I let a beat pass. "I know which server farm the backups misfired to," I said, because Priya had taught me which half-true sentence would sound largest. "And I know the alias used to tunnel back. I also know that if you'd been certain you wouldn't be here." He leaned back like a cat deciding whether to pounce. "A meeting may be arranged," he said, "with the man who can fix things. Discretion, however, is non-negotiable." Across the room, a barista knocked a portafilter against a bin steam, screaming. Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and the tiniest interest passed through his eyes before he put it face down. Priya would later tell me that the device had reached for a VPN endpoint it had used twice before, and that sometimes the world is kind enough to repeat its mistakes. "We'll call you Mark," said, rising all smooth edges. "Don't make us regret our generosity." He left no cup in the trash, no message on the table. Ruiz slid into his seat 30 seconds later. "We got a breadcrumb," she said, keeping her face neutral. "Not the loaf, but enough to send a dog after. The endpoint is Canadian Vancouver Island. We'll pass it to our liaison. You go home." Home was a word I could sit down inside. I rode back with an unremarkable tale of unremarkable cars. Marion had left a note on the counter reminding me to eat something that had a color not found in coffee. I tried to do that. I also tried not to think about how far an island is and how close a screen can feel. The call came 2 days later. The way good news sometimes does, too early for despair, too late for panic. "He's in custody," Ruiz said, with an exhale that only pretended to be a sentence. "RCMP executed a warrant at a condo near the Inner Harbor in Victoria this morning. He was there. 2 laptops, 3 phones, a notebook that thinks it's a ledger. Our counterparts move fast." I sat down on the kitchen floor because I didn't trust any furniture not to float away. "Is it? Will the money?" "Pieces of it," she said. "Some wires can be stopped when the right people push the right buttons. Some won't be. The point is, Ward is not a rumor. He's a person in a room with a door." When I hung up, I realized I was smiling in the way you smile when lightning strikes far enough away to count between flash and sound. I called my mother. She didn't say "I told you to be careful," or "I wish none of this had happened." She said, good with a solidity that made me think of Oak. My father texted a single word, "Finally," and then a minute later added, "I should have known you'd be braver than the rest of us." That afternoon, the headline shifted tone the way a choir shifts key international arrest and embezzlement case. Reporters used alleged, more teacher less. Maya brought over lemon bars and the news that the PTA had started a rumor that I was in witness protection. "You're very glamorous now," she said gravely, and I laughed hard enough to undo a threat of the week. Ava's lawyer called to say she would be cooperating with prosecutors. The words proffer session and downward departure joined our family's vocabulary, where once we'd kept phrases like APR and portfolio mix polished and on display. I wrote back to Ava, "I got your letter. I used it. Then I don't know what forgiveness looks like yet, but I'm not locking the door from my side. For the first time since the dining room, I slept like a person instead of a question mark." In the morning, I opened my laptop and added a lesson to the money sense unit about what happens when money goes places it shouldn't, and how a budget isn't just math, it's a map, and maps can keep you out of swamps. I wrote an objective that said, "Students will understand that transparency is a kindness we do for our future selves." The day the call came, I was labeling 3 mason jars for a lesson spend save share when my phone buzzed on the desk. "Arraignment next week," Detective Ruiz said. Ward's counsel is posturing, but the evidence traveled better than he did. Her voice carried a steadiness I had come to rely on. We'll need you for a brief statement. After that, most of your part is over. Over is not a word that fits cleanly. It frays. Still, it marked a seam. Ava's lawyer confirmed she would sit for a proffer mapping the network Ward used and the routes the money took when it wanted to disappear. The Financial Crimes Unit began the slow work of turning footprints back into funds. Some steps could be retraced. Others dissolved where the tide always wins. At school, Ms. Larkin approved my Money Sense unit for a pilot. Maya helped me cut laminated bills. The kids argued joyfully about whether a library fine counted as a want. I wrote objectives I believed in. Students will understand that every choice is a cost and a gift. The district asked me to share the framework at a Saturday workshop. On the day, the folding chairs filled with teachers who look like they keep entire towns running. I spoke about jars and fairness and how transparency is a kindness you do for your future self. When the session ended, my father was waiting in the hallway, coat over his arm like an apology. That he said, eyes bright and almost boyish, is the smartest portfolio I've seen. Ward pled to a weave of charges in exchange for a roadmap the prosecutors could use on others. Ava, in County Beige, at a courtroom she once visited for bank outreach, read a statement without makeup to hide behind. She did not ask for forgiveness. She asked the court to let her earn a version of it later. The judge gave her 32 months with the possibility of parole at 18 if she completed addiction treatment and financial ethics courses. Gambling is not a crime until it compels other ones. Sentences can't teach that, but programs try. We visited her 2 weeks after intake. The walls were the color of grudges. Ava's hair had surrendered its careful shape. Her hands shook, then steadied. I am learning to say, I did this without following it with 1,000 buts, she said, and the sentence was a map folded down to the necessary square. I told her I had used her letter to help catch Ward. She nodded like a person relieved to have done one unselfish thing in a year. I understand if you need distance, she added. I'm here either way. For the first time in months, I believe the second half. At home, our house rearranged itself. Marion's voice, once an instrument tuned for background harmony, moved to melody. She scheduled family therapy without waiting for consent disguised as consensus. She went to a support group for families dealing with compulsive gambling and returned with handouts and a humor drier than the pamphlets. Richard sat in the front row of humility and took notes. He sold a vintage watch I'd only seen him wear on victories and wrote me a check with a memo line that read, "Bridge not bail." It's a loan if you need it to be, he said, not meeting my eyes. Or a gift if you can stand it. Pride and love are old sparring partners. I let love win that round. In late spring, I signed papers for a small condo on a tree-lined block that smells like rain even when it isn't raining. The living room has a crooked window that throws generous light. The kitchen thinks it's bigger than it is. On move-in day, Maya brought lemon bars and tape. My parents came with a potted rosemary that looked like a tiny stubborn tree. Richard handed me a slim box. Inside was a brass keychain shaped like a compass, the enamel worn where a thumb would find it. Direction, he said, attempting a smile. You've had yours all along. I'm trying to learn mine. Summer found its shape. The district adopted Money Sense across 3 schools. I spent Tuesdays at a community center teaching parents and kids together. Jar Math Habit talks stories about choices that look small until they aren't. Reporters stopped calling. The neighbor who had avoided me in the elevator asked about paint colors. Quiet returned not as absence but as room. On the first Sunday of each month, we retired the formal dining room and gathered at my small table instead. We ate things that didn't need carving: pasta, salads, bread torn by hand. Richard raised his water glass. Marion added a toast and a deadline for starting game night. We talked about little victories, a student who finally loved fractions, a basil plant, refusing to quit a letter Ava wrote from the program about making amends as a verb. When grief visited, we made it tea and then showed it the door. Before school started again, I stood on my balcony at dusk, the city laid out like a circuit board softly lit. Inside 3 labeled jars waited on my counter a lesson and a promise. The wind lifted, and somewhere a neighbor laughed hard enough to make a dog bark. Truth had cost us, and it had paid us back in currencies I didn't know how to count when the storm began. Clarity steadiness rooms we could sit in together without performing a part. We are not restored to the people we were. We are, I think, better at being the ones we are now. When I went in for teacher work week, I taped a final line above the whiteboard just beneath the migration timeline. Balance isn't quiet, it's care. The kids would ask what it meant. I would tell them a version they could use. And later, when they were older, they might learn the adult translation that the life you keep is built out of the truths you do not postpone. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.